You go back home, you tell them to go back home. They're going to say, what? We are white, we are English. Well, Anglo-Saxons came from Germany and Scandinavia. You go back home. The only difference between us and the Anglo-Saxons is they came before us. They're also immigrants. If they tell you to go back home, you tell them to go back home. And they will be surprised. They'll be shocked to hear this. And then you explain to them their history. You tell them Angles came from Scandinavia, predominantly Denmark, Norway, and Holland. And Saxons came from Germany. And the native people of these lands, the British Isles, or British Islands, they are Celts.
You're right, so I'm just going to pause that for a minute. There's some truth in what you're saying, I understand. But you can't justify people coming from the Middle East, Africa, South Central Asia, Oriental Asia, and having exactly the same amount of claim to the land as people from Northwest Europe, Anglo-Saxons, Celts, Scandinavians, even people from Italy, would have some sort of claim really to founding Britain, essentially. Even a lot of the Irish, they're not all Celts. There's no end of people I know from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and they've got blonde hair, blue eyes, because you've got that Germanic descent. There's no end of people I've known who are more... They're very obvious to tell. Some of the Viking lads are often tall with blonde hair, blue eyes. The Germanic type's a bit shorter, blonde hair, blue eyes. I mean, that's stereotyping a little bit. But it's very obvious which side they're on, either Celtic or Germanic. But it's that mixture that's worked so brilliantly. If you look at Zulu, the movie Zulu, you've got that brilliant combination between Celtic and Germanic with the two officers. It's obviously Michael Caine and the other actor, I'm not too sure what his name was. But you've also got Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant. You've even got the Peep Show, with, what's his name? Simon Webb and David Mitchell. You've always got that Celtic-Germanic mixture that seemed to work so brilliantly. To be fair, when you look at the Celtic-Germanic areas of the country, so one of the main hubs really of sort of Germanic prowess would be London, or Londinium if you go back to the Roman times. But certainly London, with all the engineering it would have required for the underground, which is mainly Germanic, Anglo-Saxon brain inspired. A lot of the Celtic lands, say for example the West Country, they're quite boring. There's not really a lot there. A lot of the West Country is kind of nothingness. So without that Anglo-Saxon influence, you wouldn't have this country as it is. A lot of the Celtic lands are very small towns and extremely rural. So I think the Anglo-Saxon influence was enormous. I mean, like I was going on about then, London would have been a combination of the Celts, if you like, who would have been largely responsible for digging out the underground and creating it through the brawn side of it, the hard-working labour sort of side. But you would have probably required that Germanic Anglo-Saxon brain to create the underground. That's the way I see it. I mean, London was Middlesex. Of course, you had Essex with the East Saxons. You had East Anglia with the Angles, of course. And obviously with Saint Edmund and the Vikings, around Suffolk, Hoxne, around Suffolk, Saint Edmund was tied to a tree there, and that's where he got executed by the Vikings. That's why, if you ever go past the Green King, if you look, there's a crown with arrows for it. That's the history behind it. But East Anglia in particular, no end of blonde hair and blue eye, no end of Anglo-Saxons and Scandinavians that you can find, because that's where they fought and where they settled. Wessex, a lot of Wessex, there's a good mixture between Celtic and Germanic, but you know what? You find that all across the country, that Celtic-Germanic mixture, and there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. That's the makeup that made Britain, and from 1066 up until 1948, that's what we would have recognised as British, as English, as Scottish, as Welsh, as Irish. That was our national makeup. But to have some Pakistani sitting there going on about saying go back to your own country because you're Germanic, well, it's Northwest Europe. You go back to your own continent. This. And the scary thing is, there's about 8,000 comments in the comment section, and there's nobody calling it out. There's nobody challenging it. But I'll tell you what, I'll give this lady a credit. What's her name? Candid with I don't actually know her name. Is it Candid? But yeah, she's the one who brought it to my attention just then. She's often calling out the Pakistani community for their hypocrisy. Obviously, it's not all of them, but but to me personally, I'd much rather someone like this stay in this country. I'd have no problem with it whatsoever. Someone who's clearly speaking out in the interest of what's right. It's not necessarily. It's more or less doing what's morally right and allowing someone who's moved from Pakistan, from South Central Asia, to Britain seeking a better life, and then to sit there arrogantly telling Germanic people who've been in this country for thousands of years, or at least 1,000 years, to go back to their own country is utter nonsense. So yeah, good on this lady for bringing this up and saying it as it is. But yeah, the Anglo-Saxons, the Celts, and even some of the Roman influence and Scandinavian influences, and the Normans, from which were more or less Scandinavians with Rollo. Is it Rollo's son? I think it was William the Conqueror. But it's all a mixture that's made this country. You have the Dutch influences, a lot, no end of towns and cities like Colchester, for example, has a Dutch quarter. We're Northwest Europeans. It doesn't matter if you're blonde hair, blue eyed, ginger hair, green eyed, dark hair, dark eyed with pale skin. Like the a lot of the Celts have. It's not a problem, but that's the Northwest European mixture, Germanic settlers that made England predominantly. So yeah, I think I've said my point on all that. But what I'll say is go back to your own continent. Also, a final bit I've just come to think. So the Anglo-Saxons and the Celts, they wouldn't. It was the Anglo-Saxons obviously would have invaded the area to begin with, and there would have been a lot of clashes between the Celts and the Anglo-Saxons. So the Celts obviously were driven off to places like Cornwall, Scotland, Wales, and probably to Ireland as well. And it has to be said though, obviously as time went on, there would have been a bit of a mixture and things would have settled down, particularly after the Normans, and then we went into that period of history. But let's get to the point. From that point on, up until about 1948, that was it. They built an incredible country, like with an empire that the sun never set on. With all its incredible history, its incredible culture, architecture, and traditions, and general kind of way of life. And I'd say that kind of carried on just about until the 1990s, really, because it wasn't all over then. It was the culture was changing, probably for the worse, although we couldn't see it at the time. But let's get to the point. That's what the Anglo-Saxon Celtic mind and work created. Now, what has a lot of Pakistanis brought with them? Well, let's look at Birmingham right now, with all the bin problems. Most of the bin men are obviously white British. A lot of these Pakistanis are obviously reliant on that. Added to that, of course, all the shit old suburbs of towns and cities that they create. As I say, it was like Normanton, for example, in Derby. Norman town. Obviously, that's the Normans. It could probably go all the way back to then. But all these areas would have been created by the white British demographic, whether you're Celtic or Germanic, doesn't matter. Now it's inhabited by people from South Central Asia, Pakistan, India, and it's a shithole, and it doesn't feel comfortable to be around anymore. That's everywhere though. Birmingham, Bradford's the most dangerous. I think it's the most dangerous city in Europe statistically. So that's what Pakistanis have brought with them. So you've inherited a country that you had nothing to do with. You've just come here when it's all been built, and funnily enough, because you couldn't build it in the first place, it's turning into a shithole. So enjoy it while it lasts, because if you tell this Anglo-Saxon mindset to go home to their own countries, then everywhere will turn into a shithole like you're seeing now.